Morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're located. I'm Eric Miscoll, publisher of EMS Now, and welcome to this edition of the virtual Eric Miscoll Show. I'm joined again today by Phil Stoten, my co-host. Thank you, Phil. Those of you who aren't following the work, please do. He's doing some excellent interviews within the industry these days that we're very proud to be publishing and sharing. Quick housekeeping, everybody should be on mute except for our speakers and our guests today. If you have any questions from the audience, we ask that you do that using the question tab at the bottom of the screen. And this is being recorded, so we will be publishing this live on EMS Now, end of the week or possibly beginning of next week, depending on how things stack up. The focus of our show today is EMS industry in North America. So we thought it would be best to invite some people who happen to operate in that realm, and we're glad to be joined today by Brad Heath, the CEO of Virtex. I'll let you guess which one on the screen he is with all the big sign behind him there. And also Todd Baggett, COO of Creation Technologies. Welcome both, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Both of these companies, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves here shortly, both themselves and their companies, are primarily North American-based EMS companies. They, by North America, of course, we mean the United States, Canada, and Mexico. I think Brad's company, Virtex, is all North America. Todd, with Creation Technologies, has primarily North America as well as facility in China. So I'll stop introducing them and turn it over. Why don't we begin, gentlemen, by giving you each an opportunity to both introduce yourselves and your company to our audience. And maybe Brad, why don't we begin with you?
Sure, Brad Heath, I'm the CEO and founder of Virtex. Virtex has 8 sites in the US and 1 in Mexico. We specialize in aerospace defense, industrial, and high-rel type applications. So we do everything from PCB assembly, system build, product design and development, precision machining, wire and cable harness assembly, as well as test and aftermarket services.
Super. Todd, please.
Thank you, Eric. My name is Todd Baggett. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Creation Technologies. We're a mid-tier EMS provider founded in British Columbia in 1991, and we'll have revenues in 2020 of around 600 million US. We've got 2 sites in Mexico, as you said, 1 in China. We've got 3 sites in Canada, 1 in Western Canada, 2 in the Toronto area, and 5 in the US, including a design center in Denver and a prototyping center as well. We focus on the high mix, high complexity programs, low to mid volume types of programs in defense and aerospace, medical, tech, industrial markets.
Very good. Well, to begin, I'd like to ask we can't move into these without asking about the pandemic and the impact it's had. It's been a game changer for all of us personally and professionally. And has not settled down or resolved yet, obviously. So maybe I begin by asking what has the impact been of the pandemic on your operations, and where does things stand now? And maybe Todd, why don't we just begin with you there, sir?
Sure, it's been quite a ride. I don't think any of us have managed through a global pandemic before, so it's a unique experience for sure. A lot of learning on the fly. With having multiple sites, we learn from one another. I think they all, being in different geographies, kind of had some unique local challenges. For example, in Mexico, the government was pretty quick to shut down in Mexico and force us to shut down, but the comeback plan was pretty uncertain. So it took a lot of navigating to make that happen. In the other sites, we tended to, maybe be partially down for just a brief period, but came back online fairly quickly. The priority always, obviously, was taking care of our employees, making sure they're safe and that their families are safe, and then, of course, keeping our customers supplied. So, the typical The use of masks, good hygiene, social distancing, and those things have really worked. I'm a big believer in masks because we've got 3,500 employees worldwide, all coming to work every day, and we've only had in the company 15 cases of COVID, and really none of those were outbreaks in the workplace. They were all onesies that people had a spouse in the healthcare industry or what have you that came back to work with it. But with good isolation techniques and whatnot, we've been very fortunate to keep really with no significant outbreaks in the workplace. So again, it makes me believe that masks and distancing and sanitization really work. Now that employees are safe, it's really a matter of keeping customers online. You get the whole spectrum of, some customers are going crazy with demand and others are completely down, right? So, and so I think, for example, in Everett, Washington, we work on a ventilator program and we're working 7 days a week on that program. And we've got others that, again, have pretty much flatlined since COVID. So if you net that all out, we're in pretty good shape. We're off plan just a bit for the year. We've got the benefit of good diversification. And I think that's, part of this industry is that companies are fairly well diversified in the customer base. So that's been a blessing as well. But it's been a rocky road, but I got to say we're probably doing better than we thought we would be doing through all of this. So it's a blessing.
Hey, Todd, did you have to navigate some of that legislation stuff for essential status at particular facilities to keep them open, or was that not part of the complication there?
Initially, yes. We had to provide some documentation that said we were building essential products. And we do have a number of products that are essential, like the ventilator program that I mentioned, several major medical programs. But I think, ultimately local governments leaned pretty hard toward letting manufacturing continue. Right? It's such a lifeline of the economy, an important part of the economy, that I think there was definitely a bias toward running manufacturing in most places. I think Mexico, as I mentioned earlier, was a bit of an exception there. But all in all, I think local governments worked hard to keep us running and make sure we were safe and our employees were safe.
That's good.
Brad, how's things been in your world?
Our experience actually parallels Todd's fairly well. We were up and running the entire time at all sites, including Mexico. We had filed for an exemption form early with the state and the federal government, which they promptly then came out and said, yeah, we know that you guys are applying for that, but we're ignoring all of those and we don't really want anybody operating. So they started doing local audits and got as far as our next door neighbor shutting people down and never came to our plant. So we were fortunate to keep running there. We say we missed it by the weekend, right? Because it was Friday afternoon, they were next door, and Monday they started up somewhere else. So I think we just got lucky. But we've had very good results with our practices. Like Todd said, the masks, the cleaning, the social distancing, the spacing out, the rescheduling shifts, all of that has worked very, very well. Our experience with cases parallels pretty similar based on size. We're about 850 employees. We've had less than half a dozen cases. None of those were contracted in the workplace. One of the messages I gave our employees frequently and continue to repeat is, I can only protect you 8 hours a day. You need to do your part the other 16. Don't go to places that you shouldn't be out in bars and areas where you're going to go and potentially bring it back and put not only your coworkers, but our customers at risk. And that message has resonated well. Actually, our best performing site in COVID was Mexico. And I think part of that is because, they've been through, the swine flu, they've been through SARS, they've been through several of these before, and they're used to following those rules where, you had a lot more people who were questioning things, particularly, early stages of this, where everybody just said, okay, here we go again in Mexico. And then we literally had no who contracted it.
And I think that was indicative with the speed at which masks were used. Like, Todd, you've got facilities in Asia. I've got friends in Hong Kong and Asia, and as soon as there was even a whisper of this, everybody was just wearing masks in the street. And they wear masks sometimes just because there's too much pollution in the city. So they were ready to go. And I think the legislation in China was you had to have, something like 2 or 3 masks per member of staff per shift, and you had to have 7 days visibility of masks to reopen your facility and get that license. So that was important. Where did you guys get help in terms of making sure that stuff was available, getting advice, getting information? Were you left to do that yourselves? Did you get it through legislation, or did you get it through associations?
We did it through a combination of our supply base, which worked for a while until China shut that down. But we were bringing them in, 2,000, which was the limit of what you could bring in, but we were bringing it in every day for a couple weeks to get a stockpile, and then got loaded. And by that point, a lot of our local distributors had been able to get stuff into the shelves. So they filled up once China got shut down. But for the initial part, we were flying them in daily.
Yeah, masks were certainly a challenge. I think it probably took us 2 to 3 weeks into March and April to get a good supply of masks into the site. So that was challenging for sure.
Yeah.
So one of the big issues here coming out of the pandemic has been regionalization, reshoring, whatever you wish to call it. I always call it regionalization because I think build in region for region is kind of the strategy, right? Reshoring always implies some type of political agenda going on. So, so I guess what is the impact on your business? Now you're mostly been North America, but I don't know if you have your customers, if you've gotten some new business coming out of that, if you had customers, calling you saying, we need a manufacturer, we need something in North America, or can you guys help us? How has that been? How's your experience been with that?
I've seen an uptick in kind of the momentum of regionalization, and it's going 2 ways. I'll give you an example. We just won a new program that has requirements both in Asia and in North America. And the OEM was pretty specific about our China plant building for the Asian needs and Mexico building for the North American needs. So we're actually seeing, when the tariffs first came on, it had a huge negative impact on our China facility. But we're actually seeing a pretty good reversal in that momentum now with regionalization in Asia for Asia, and likewise in Mexico as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you're actually seeing an uptick in demand in Asia as well as in the Americas.
And these are primarily North American OEMs that are more specifically looking for Asia supply for Asian demand.
That's interesting. What have you seen, Brad?
We've seen a mix. We've seen a mix of people who really want to diversify their supply chain and put a portion of it back into North America. I think more to Mexico certainly than the U.S., but we've seen some that are looking at product redesign and redevelopment to cost to hit their cost targets. We're working on a couple things in that space for customers. But we've also seen some who moved 100% of their product from China back to Mexico or into Mexico. And that's worked relatively well. We've also seen a number of people who, say they want to go do it, but, it's all about price. And, with some of the material cost issues, particularly for a product that's subsidized heavily over in China, some of it's just not practical, particularly a lot of the LED lighting type applications where there's, you can buy an entire light for what you can buy a power supply over here. So some of those applications, it's like there's a desire, but practically it doesn't work. They've got to be in the right markets.
Yeah, you've got to have the right product. And I think that's the key to, any of these trends. And that's why I quite like that term, right shoring. It's picking the right location for it. Are your OEM customers, have their thought processes changed? Are they saying, yes, we need more regionalization, but also we need more redundancy in our supply chain. We need more resilience. We need we need agility, so we know you can switch from one facility to the other. Are they asking questions they maybe didn't ask before?
They're asking some. They're probably not asking as much as they should. We're proactively doing a lot of things with our supply chain right now, particularly on some of the longer lead items, to try and allocate raw material to some of those products to bring the lead times down and give us more flexibility in those, particularly in some of the mill style connectors that are extremely long lead time and hard to get. So, we're chasing some opportunities like that proactively for our customers, because we need more resiliency and we need more agility than what the current supply chain is going to be able to offer.
Yeah, it's almost doing what they should be doing. What about you, Todd?
I'm seeing a lot of interest and need from customers for business continuity planning with COVID. We've got a new opportunity we're entertaining right now that's purely a business continuity play for that OEM. And then we've got several of our current customers that have asked about continuity planning. I think, with some of the abrupt shutdowns with COVID, I think it made OEMs step back and evaluate their risk planning, right? And then so I'm seeing a fair amount of that.
And so how do you do that? How do you do that, guys? Because we're not out of this one yet. We've got a plan for the next one. It's probably not going to be a pandemic. It might be a typhoon, or it might be a political issue. In fact, I'd probably guess that political is probably pretty high up there, because everything's a little bit fragile at the moment. How do you do that business continuity planning when you don't know what's coming next? Is it just about creating more flexibility, more adaptability in the supply chain?
It's adaptability in the supply chain. It's some commonality in equipment. It's redundant facilities. It's actually pre-qualifying some products across facilities to be able to move. Some of the things, it's going to take a lot to go ahead and move them because they're highly regulated. It's going to require new first articles at significant expense. PPAPs, things like that, are going to have to be redone all the way up to the top level. So, some of that we're preparing to be able to do that, but there's a piece that's going to have to be done at the customer level, and they're going to have to decide when's the right time to do that, because it is a collaborative effort. It's not something that we can do, 100% in a vacuum.
Yeah. Todd, that project that you're working on, that's business continuity, what's the kind of shape and style of that project?
I'd call it a fairly aggressive project. I mean, this particular customer is saying that they want to be able to run product almost simultaneously in either site, which, there's a lot of planning and some costs that goes with that, honestly, right? So oftentimes business continuity is a little easier in theory than in practice, right? And really, if you're going to do it in practice, you probably have to spend some money and some resources to make that happen. And I'm kind of surprised by the customer we're working with now, how aggressively they're coming at it and acknowledging that there may be some cost and whatnot to do it. But there's some things that are kind of low hanging and easy, but if you really want to be without risk, there's quite an effort and some cost that goes with it.
Yeah. Let me follow up, Todd, real quick with what you're saying. So what is that process like then? Because obviously you can't turn it on if it's being built somewhere else, the redundancy in another factory. There's a ramp up to that, right? And it has to be a really planned, staged execution strategy there, isn't there?
Well, you'd have to guarantee duplicate equipment sets. You've got to qualify products. I mean, a lot of these industries use PPAP so you've got a PPAP product on that equipment. You may have some redundancy in supply chain where you're driving parts into sites. They're talking about some things like that, especially the long lead, high challenge sorts of parts. So the sky's the limit as to what can be done, but it's like running a program in two places, right? If you really want to do it to the T.
Todd, who pays for that? Do they want you to pay for it?
No, I think the customer's got to pay for that. It would be very difficult to shoulder the financial burden of that. In this case, I think we're going to provide the equipment because we already have duplicate equipment in place. They've
Yeah.
got redundant ERP and product lifecycle management software and all of that. But when it comes to buying parts, that's when we're going to ask the customer to pay for that.
Yeah, stocking in both places. Brad, do they understand the cost and the value of doing this?
They understand it. I won't say they always like it, but they understand it. And
Yeah.
Again, it's got to be collaborative. It's got to be a partnership.
Yeah. Yeah. So just going from that in terms of cost, what about cost comparisons when people, and I'm guessing that the nearest comparison that we've got in the Americas to manufacturing in Asia would be Mexico. How different is that, and are there ways that Mexico can become more competitive to to pick up some of that business, or is the problem, like you said, Brad, that it's too far deep in the supply chain that the dependence on China exists?
So the one thing that's making Mexico a little more competitive right now is, as Todd mentioned earlier, is the tariffs. The fact that the entire product is getting hit with a tariff, if you're building in China versus depending on your BOM cost and the amount of labor, et cetera, that you're doing, as well as locally sourced material, you can avoid a lot of the tariffs by purchasing that. You'll pay the VAT coming into Mexico, but when you export it, you can reclaim that. So there are some strategies that we use to bring it closer to parity. Labor-wise, you're at very close. Wage rates between Mexico and China, so there's really not a wage disparity. It's really what can you buy parts for, and so much of the components are made over in China. When you get into very low dollar parts, the logistics expense, the warehousing, the shipping across, getting it touched by a U.S. distributor who then gets touched by a Mexico distributor, those costs all have to roll up into the cost of the product. So, unless you're doing all of your sourcing over in China and shipping that over in mass, it's very, very hard to hit parity.
Yeah, but I guess then it's really educating the customer on that, on the reason to have those different cost structures and the reason to have those different geographies, and it's like the value of resilience. It's really hard to put a price on, but if it's 2 or 3% to have a much more resilient supply chain when 100% of your product is impacted by something like the COVID experience, then hopefully customers will start to see that.
Yeah, and it also depends on the type of products, right? I mean, we're not heavy and really do almost none of consumer style products.
Of course.
Trying to move a consumer product over would be almost impossible from a cost standpoint to hit all of those same things. Plus, to Todd's point earlier, a lot of the consumption is over in China. So, you've got to look at, where's the use point, what's your total logistics, what's your total landed cost. And then, if you really do a good analysis on total landed cost, you can come up to something that comes pretty close to parity on the right subset of products. And that's kind of what we try to do with our customers.
Yeah.
If you go back to I look back to the tariffs, I think it really shined a light on the fact that the labor rates in China aren't what they used to be. If you go back 20 years, 30 years, China had an amazing combination of very, very inexpensive labor with great technical skills and good pro-business environment. But over the years, subtly or not so subtly, there's been a lot of inflation in those wages. And so when tariffs came on board, it caused a lot of OEMs to step back and look and do the comparison between Mexico and China. And I think if the tariffs went away today, there would not be a major shift of work back to China, because again, the tariffs really shined a light on the fact that the wages are not that much different.
No, and it's interesting. I always look at China and I think they kind of kick the door down with low cost labor, but they've kept it open with that industrial strategy and that amazing logistics and supply chain.
But they've also been very honest about that in their 5-year plan. It's the current one or the previous one. They stated we will not be the low cost labor supplier to the world anymore, right? So they did notice on the industry.
But we will subsidize certain industries that we want to overperform,
Well,
and we will manipulate our currency, and we will not be a fair player on the international stage. But other than that, yeah, sure.
other than that, right.
Well, you had asked Eric what Mexico, or I think it was you, Phil, that asked what Mexico could do. And I think Mexico could learn a lot from China as far as creating a pro-business environment and being more accommodating to OEMs in Mexico, because I think it's a bit of a laissez-faire attitude toward companies who come into Mexico. It's not a hostile environment by any stretch, but they're not as accommodating maybe as I've seen, and I've worked in China for many years. The local governments really roll out the red carpet for business, right? And you don't necessarily see that in Mexico.
Well,
as far as making sure.
Mexico's a little more hostile if you're on the border.
Yeah.
They changed the labor rates for everybody on the border, but they didn't do interior. So, I mean, they basically doubled the minimum daily rate, wage rate in Mexico under the new administration. So, certainly the new administration is not as business friendly as the old administration, but since so few people are working for the minimum wage anyway, it works out okay. But certainly.
Have you seen any changes with the new? Well, it's not NAFTA anymore. What is it? The USMCA, as they call it, the new trade agreement. How do you have you sensed changes within that as well?
I've not seen any change thus far.
Yeah, there's supposed to be some change to help, the automotive, side of things, mostly on the U.S. side. But I think if you look at how much of the content is done in how many different areas, I think it's probably going to have a minimal impact even on the automotive industry. Everybody else, it's kind of more status quo. I think the good news is a lot of the industry polices itself, because they did take a lot of the teeth out of, enforcement and that with, USMCA versus what they had in NAFTA. So, there's some areas like oil and that non-manufacturing that may see more impact, either positive or negatively from that. But I think the electronic side is going to be pretty much status quo.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, Todd. Brad, if you're in the automotive sector, you've got a lot of other things to worry about rather than just trade agreements at the moment. And that kind of brings us on to an interesting topic, which is the different sectors. We're seeing serious fluctuations in the sectors where we're making lots of medical equipment, a lot of which is going to be ready a few months after we need it. There's going to be a glut of ventilators in 2021, but who knows if there's a second wave. The automotive industry is down, obviously. Air travel is down, but I think military aerospace is doing okay. How do you see those sectors, and how do you balance that as a business? Have you guys been lucky in terms of having that mix, or do you just try and keep that mix as broad as possible?
Brad?
Todd?
Well,
there we go, Todd.
We have the luxury, we were really well diversified. We don't have a single customer more than 5% of revenue, and we're pretty much equally divided across the three big segments. So we've seen, again, we've had ups, we've had downs. We're net slightly down. The medical sector is doing really well, and we kind of expected that it would. There's the direct COVID-related hardware is going very strong. Other more like elective surgery sorts of hardware, it slumped kind of momentarily, but has come back really well. The aerospace and defense side has remained pretty level through all of this. I mean, at some point, the aerospace industry's got to take a hit. I mean, with the Boeing challenges and whatnot, it's inevitable, but we haven't seen it yet. Probably the big one is the tech industrials, which tends to be a pretty broad market anyway, different types of products. We do a lot of infrastructure types of equipment like power line monitoring and energy management, things like that. The shoe hasn't fallen on that much yet. And so we're cautious. Q4 is a big unknown right now. It looks to be kind of on plan, but it's just hard to believe that there won't be some tweaks between now and then. As companies start to to understand what COVID is going to mean to them. And with being diversified, you see OEMs that are, some that are very, very proactive, and some that probably are going to get into the fourth quarter and realize that their warehouses are full, and they're going to ask us to slam on the brakes, right? So it's, but all in all, I think the industry in general, if you've seen some of the earnings on the big guys that have started to come out, are doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's been impressive, hasn't it? What about you, Brad?
We've seen similar. We'll end up pretty much on plan for the year. Again, maybe slightly down, maybe right on plan, but not with the customers or the mix that we totally expected it to be, for sure. There's certainly some that are down. Anywhere where they were supporting hospitality service industries, things like that. They're down. Some of the energy management stuff, when you can't get in to do installs, I think there's going to be a continued lull of that for stuff that is sitting in the warehouse because it hasn't been able to be pulled to be installed. But overall, with our customer base, it's also been very strong. Most of them were totally solid through Q1 and into the beginning of Q2 with some push outs, starting to pull some stuff back into Q3 with an expectation for a pretty strong Q4. So we're I guess as bullish as anyone can be on the market right now. Of course, there's also a lot of the small regional players who are really, really hurting right now, and we see some of those guys falling off the space, and more opportunity there coming out in Q4 and Q1. So there'll certainly be, I believe, at least some cannibalistic nature to this, where there's some people who just don't have the money to get through this, and being a mid-tier is significantly better than being a small tier right now.
Yeah, it's kind of shone a light on everything that is, any problem that's there has been amplified, and any added value that you can provide your customers has also been amplified. It's been a real test for business models. Has it made you guys think we need to, we've got this right, this is all fine, or has it made you think we need to make some tweaks here? When we look at EMS in, say, 2022, when hopefully there's some level of normality in the market, what do you think you would change to make your business even better?
Our strategic 3 to 5 year stuff still holds. We don't see any change to that. We certainly see some minor tweaks in how we're building redundancy between facilities, how we're handling some of the things in those supply chains. We're realigning a couple facilities within regions to really be able to respond better. We had real concerns with the facility in New Jersey and a facility in the Boston area that we could have a whole facility shut down. So it created those proactive conversations with our customer base who don't want to move their product because they are highly regulated and qualified, that said, look, we need to be planning for this just in case. You have massive amounts of people in, just across the state line there, and no indication that it's not coming to our facility. So, we had those conversations early, and we put a lot of additional plans, controls, test runs, et cetera, in place in the event that we need it. So we're going to continue doing more of that, and continuing some of the earlier stage involvement, and possibly on the early stage of programs, qualifying more than one facility on the front side, because again, next time we should be reacting to an already created plan, not trying to go figure out what the hell do we do this time.
Yeah, so it's that reacting in real time, isn't it? Todd, is it more just in case and less just in time?
I think, like Brad, I think our fundamental business model is sound. It's stood the test of this crisis, but the contingency planning is where we could do better. When you look, we all got caught flat-footed. There's no question, and some unique surprises came out of the woodwork. One good news story, for example, we do a pretty large program for a company in the fishing industry, right? And with the stimulus dollars, their demand just went like through the ceiling, right? And so it's amazing, what can happen, good or bad, and being prepared for that in the event of certain certain types of emergencies. A pandemic is something we probably should have seen coming. And I know we'll have stockpiles of masks and sanitizers and things like that going forward. There'll be no question about that. But yeah, being more prepared for contingencies is probably where we'll be looking at next year.
Yeah. And now you know that stimulus checks results in an uptick in sales of fishing equipment. Who'd have thought it?
A nice uptick. Yeah.
Listen, the other thing, I think it was Ronald Reagan called it the silly season that we're about to enter into here with a presidential election here in the country this year, right? And that always, I think back to years past, there was always, as a buildup to the presidential election, there's always a talk of, we talked about regionalization, bringing manufacturing back, right? And then that got a lot of airplay. The election happened and it drifted away and got quiet again in status quo. It's a lot different this year. So not necessarily on the regionalization side, but what do you see the potential impact to your business being with the election season coming? Todd, you're shaking your head.
It is so difficult to tell. It's
Yeah.
so difficult to tell. It's, in theory, it's been a pro-business climate for the last 4 years. But it's hard to really understand the sentiment of people are so polarized. It'll be difficult to understand kind of what consumer sentiment does. Infrastructure investment, it's really difficult to know. Honestly, I hope that things kind of, things may flutter a bit, but I'd hope there's not any significant shift in the economic climate coming out of the election.
Brad, how are you on that one?
I'm similar. I think probably the best thing that happens, regardless of who wins, the presidency, is that we end up maintaining a split House and Senate. That way they have to at least work together or not work together. And frankly, the status quo and doing nothing is better than a polar extreme to either side. There's certainly some things where, if you roll back some of the corporate tax rates, you're going to definitely do some things that are going to slow down and hurt the economy. You're going to reduce people's capital expenditures. So, in a time where, frankly, we need to be investing more money in, automation and resiliency, if and it would take them a while to do this, but if they rolled back some of the tax, advantages that came out over the last 4 years, it's going to be a little more painful. But again, we've survived both types of administrations, and Virtex has been around 20 years, and so I guess this is our 6th presidency. So we'll survive this one too. It'll be okay. We'll continue to stay involved with the IPC Government Relations Committee and trying to get critical electronics agendas put there. We certainly, to fill your point earlier, continue to push a lot of the agenda on shoring up the U.S. industrial base. There's a lot of things that we don't have control over manufacturing right now that we really should be building more of, in the U.S. or certainly in North America. And that's, that includes semiconductors, passive electronics, connectors, a lot of stuff that we put 100% of that overseas. And, in the event that you got into a full-fledged trade war, you could have serious disruption. Fortunately, we didn't have this go around. I'm a free market guy, so I'm not in favor of the tariffs that happen in any form, fashion. And I tend to believe that, given a free market, the U.S. and Mexico combination can compete anywhere in the world. So there's certainly a way to go ahead and do that, shy of tariffs. But by the same token, I'm not opposed to forcing everybody to play by the same set of rules and play fairly.
Yeah. And it's just another disruption, isn't it? At the end of the day, tariffs and the trade war was a disruption. The presidential election is another disruption. It's all about building that adaptability and agility into your business and being ready for that. And you've learned a huge amount through this experience. You talked about investment in automation, and I'm kind of curious, a couple of things there. One is, do we see a acceleration in digital transformation as a result of what's gone on? But secondly, is that what government stimulus should be focusing on, rather than giving tax breaks to companies to build factories? Should they be giving tax breaks to people to invest in digital transformation that makes manufacturing more competitive, that makes it more agile and more resilient, that brings stuff back as a result of the competitive nature? Because nobody wants to pay more for products to be made somewhere different.
So I'd rather see them continue to cut the taxes more, and we'll invest our own profits back into making ourselves more competitive. I don't want them giving, and this is a local deal, but giving a nice big tax break to Tesla to bring a new factory to Austin with my workforce. I don't want them to go ahead and make it easier for them to go, compete for the jobs. So we invest a lot of time and money and effort in training, and selfishly, I'd like to keep all of those employees. But by the same time, drop the taxes, let us go ahead and put the money into the software and then the infrastructure and Industry 4.0 that will service out over the next 3, 5, 10, or 20 years.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because you guys know where to invest the money, and expecting governments to know where you need to invest that money is, pretty hopeless. Todd, it's much better if they just let you figure out where to invest the money and make it as attractive a climate for you as possible.
But just look how well they did trying to figure out where we should invest in the solar market.
Yeah.
True. A good practical example of that investment is in warehouse automation, and Amazon's a big driver, big investor in warehouse automation, and that's industry, and that's private dollars funneling the money where technology is. Warehouse automation is exploding right now, and there is so much opportunity in that space. And again, it's private dollars. It's reinvesting the profits into the place where the market wants it, right? It works. Yeah. It works.
Well, and it's also again, when employment was below 3%, go try and find people to go work in a warehouse, right? I mean, I'm sure Amazon couldn't go find 40,000 employees. They needed 10,000 employees and 30,000 robots.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm aware of the time, and one of my jobs is to manage that issue here. But as we start wrapping, what do you think the future holds then for the industry post-pandemic? It's been, a once in a lifetime kind of event that we're all kind of living through. What do you think how is the industry coming out of this? Is it stronger? How are the changes? What are you seeing there? Maybe start with you, Todd.
Well, as unfortunate as this event has been, I think it benefits our industry in many ways. I think we're entertaining new opportunities now where OEMs are finally saying, I've got to get out of this manufacturing side of the business, right? It's non-strategic, it's sat idle. We have several OEMs that we're talking to about outsourcing finally, right? And I think we as an industry have looked quite resilient through all this. We're very well diversified. We've got sites all over the globe. So we were flexible through all this. So I think it's been a good opportunity for the industry generally.
Yeah, and a great learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's the typical that doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and those of us that have survived this and stayed level or grown slightly or shrunk slightly, are going to come through this significantly better than when we started. One of the things that we look at with this is a sincere hope that as we head into the cold and flu season, assuming we don't have a second surge of this, do we have lower absenteeism because we've got better practices now of people making sure they're healthy coming to the workplace, right? A year, 2 years ago, cold and flu season, it's not uncommon to see someone come in sniffling or sneezing or coughing. That wouldn't happen these days, right? So, will we have lower absenteeism and better employee health as a result of these new practices, a lot of which will continue on well after COVID is done, and the need to wear masks. Maybe we bring them back for certain periods, but we certainly will probably continue a lot of the social distancing and the cleaning, and that I think will pay dividends with that. And to the same extent that Todd mentioned, we're having conversations with other locations and other divisions of customers who saw how well we weathered this portion compared to how some other suppliers did. And it's starting the conversations that we've been trying to have for a year or two. So those things I think are going to force people to go ahead and say, yeah, I've got to stop looking at the way we've always done it and look at what's worked, in this tough time and figure out how do we do that going forward. And we're happy to be part of that solution.
Yeah, Brad, just as a heads up, we're in down here in Australia. We're already in winter. We normally have a pretty harsh flu season. We're over 90% down in flu cases.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, and part of that is because we are social distancing, but I think part of it is a new realization of how stuff's transmitted and cleanliness and workplace environments and all that kind of thing. So, and I absolutely appreciate what Todd said. It really shows that having a diversified industry in terms of where you make stuff, but also what you make and who you make it for, is just shown to be the absolute ideal model. So it actually underlines the value of outsourcing, the value of what you do, and makes that really, relevant for customers that perhaps weren't thinking about outsourcing before. And as you say, this massive learning experience.
I remember when I used to be a consultant to the industry, we used to always speak about a stool with 3 legs, right? You need to have at least 3 legs under your stool, 3 different industry sectors. And it's the ones who didn't do that, like the Elkatech of old, who decided, hey, telecom will be here forever. We all remember them. They're not around anymore, right? So, but they were huge in their day. So, but this has been very positive, and I think I wasn't sure what the message would be because we didn't prep on any of this. But I think you come out with a very kind of a positive, optimistic, and with a lot of respect for the industry and the business that you gentlemen and your companies are doing there. I think there is probably some pain ahead still in many ways. I think, Brad, you referenced kind of the smaller companies, and that's, I think in a lot of industries, everybody expects fourth quarter to be painful, right? And so hopefully, but within there's opportunity as well, I guess, for companies who are well stocked. So lastly, just to end, I'm going to steal from one of Phil's favorite questions. If you were to offer any advice to any of your industry brethren coming out of this, especially in North America, what might that be? Maybe Todd, start with you.
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I think again, contingency planning is key. We all learned a lot through that, and being prepared, looking customer by customer and understanding what various scenarios might mean to them is really key through a scenario like this. And again, diversification. And keeping a diverse portfolio of business is really, really key. And I think this whole thing has taught us that.
Yeah.
I think one of the big things that we take out of this is continuing the lesson of over communicating to the employees. Phil, I know you and I talked about this once before, but the biggest thing that we took on originally was making sure that we were talking to all of our sites and all of our people on a very regular basis. Because in the absence of information, there's fear. And with that communication, everybody understood why we were at work. Everybody was proud to be considered critical infrastructure. We had over 40 customers who said, we need you to keep working and send us letters for those facilities. And then everybody carried a letter that said, because initially, especially up in the New England area and then New Jersey, we didn't know what was going to happen if one of our employees was trying to leave a neighborhood and they're supposed to be locked down, right? So we gave them letters and they declared that. So putting again, contingency is certainly part of the message. Contingency, communication, and resiliency is going to be the new normal.
Yeah, Brad, it's interesting that you talk about that open and honest communication. I think that's huge, and we could go another hour on leadership and talent and how you do that, because it's been a real time for leaders to step up. But what Todd said is it's the old Boy Scout thing of, be prepared, isn't it? It's preparedness is absolutely huge at the moment. So yeah, I think those two takeaways, that leadership through communication and that preparedness for the next crisis, and we've no idea what that's going to be. If you can get those things right, it's a big step forward.
Yeah, if I'd have known we were going to talk Boy Scouts, I'd award my Eagle Scout badge.
Yeah.
There you go.
I was going to ask if that was the actual right hand.
That's the salute.
I never made it that far, so
it is. He's good.
Okay, he's good.
There you go.
He passed. Okay.
It's not the Vulcan thing. That's live long and prosper. That's quite different, but actually equally relevant right now.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, listen, Brad and Todd, thank you very much for taking time today to share your thoughts and your insights on the industry. Phil, as always good to collaborate with you. Thank you to those in the audience that are listening. We are doing these shows on twice a month, actually, every 2 weeks, and we have some ones coming up. Actually, on Mexico, we're going to be doing a panel with some people in Mexico, getting an update there next month, I believe it is. So please look for those invitations and please join us when you can. And I'll close with what I always tell my kids these days when they leave the house, which is be smart, be safe, and be sexy. So anyway, gentlemen, thank you all for your time. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.